This is Indian Country Today.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. Democrat Raphael Warnock is making history with his election Tuesday night to the Senate from Georgia. He is the first African American from his party to represent that state. The second race in Georgia remains extraordinarily close. Democrat John Ossoff was leading by less than half a percentage point. If both Democrats win the Senate, it will be tied 50-50. But Democrats would control that body because Vice President-elect Kamala Harris votes if there is a tie. Four Directions, a Native American voting rights organization, said more than 100,000 Native Americans were eligible to vote in Georgia, and the margin of victory for Warnock was less than 50,000 votes, and Ossoff was leading by less than 20,000 votes. The last time there was a 50-50 Senate was 2001 and was led by Republican Trent Lott. While Democrats could control what issues make it to the Senate floor, the actual day-to-day operation would likely be far more cooperative. The Indian Affairs Committee is a model where the chairman and vice chairman often acts as a team when it comes to pushing legislation. In a Democratic Senate, Washington's Maria Cantwell or Montana's John Tester could end up as the committee chair. A Democratic-controlled Senate would make it easier for President-elect Joe Biden to win confirmation for his picks for cabinet agencies, including Representative Deb Haaland at the Interior Department. A U.S. judge in Alaska is giving the green light for oil and gas lease sales in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. The area is in far north Alaska by the Beaufort Sea. The indigenous Gwich'in at the Baskin view the coastal plain along the refuge as sacred. They've argued that protecting the land and the caribou herd that migrate through the area is a human rights issue. The National Audubon Society and other conservation groups were among those that wanted to block any leases until all lawsuit challenges were settled. The main concern is whether or not the environmental reviews were adequate. In her ruling, the judge said the groups did not show a level of harm that would cause her to grant an injunction. Her ruling comes at a time when several banks have said they will not lend to projects in the Arctic. Critics also say the Trump administration is trying to rush the process before President-elect Joe Biden takes office. While campaigning, Biden said he was in favor of permanently protecting the refuge. 9 decades after being dug up, some 2,000 Native American funerary items and remains are finally being repatriated. They are in the collection at the University of Minnesota's Weissman Art Museum. The university has been criticized by tribes and Native students for dragging its feet in returning these items as required by law. They were collected in 1928 and 1931 in New Mexico. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reports the university now has to determine which tribes will receive the items. Right now, their estimate 8 pueblos have claim to the human remains and funerary objects. While the process is underway, it could still take years before any tribe receives the items. Native American and Alaska Native tribes, along with cultural groups from the Northwest, are suing the federal government. They want to stop the sale of the National Archives building in Seattle, Washington. The Yakima Herald reports that a sale will force the relocation of millions of historical records out of state. The government plans to sell under a law aimed at unloading excess federal property. A lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court this week says the building is anything but excess. It is often used for research about everything from tribal history to fur seal hunts on remote Alaskan islands. The sale is opposed by all 8 U.S. senators and many representatives from Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. San Francisco, California's Friendship House is launching a fundraising effort for a new cultural center. The 57-year-old organization provides recovery services run by and for Native Americans. Yurok citizen and board president Abby Abenati talks about the kinship responsibility connected to the space.
If you look at it the way we would look at it traditionally, I think is we don't really see it as services. You and I see it as what are our responsibilities and how do we meet those responsibilities in this environment. We have a value system that says we must look after each other and our surroundings, and we can't do that unless we're together.
If fundraising goals are met, construction of the $80 million project will begin in 2022. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Mark Trahant. We'll be right back. We last checked in with Pokagon Band of Potawatomi at the end of September. Since then, a lot has happened with the rollout of the coronavirus vaccine. The Pokagon Band of Potawatomi are located in 2 states, Michigan and Indiana. There are nearly 6,000 citizens enrolled in the tribe. So what are the logistical challenges when it comes to vaccinating tribal citizens living in different states? Joining us today is Chairman Matthew Wesaw to talk about the pandemic vaccine and more. Welcome, Chairman Wesaw.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to give you a follow-up on the Pokagon story.
Thank you. How is it going with the vaccine process? How is it unfolding?
Well, I think we're probably suffering many of the same experiences that other tribes and communities across the country are. We're not getting it as fast as what we thought. Although I feel very fortunate, by the end of this week, we will have vaccinated approximately 400 of our tribal citizens, first responders, frontline workers, and government workers who are part of the essential workforce that have to be on site. So we feel pretty good about that, but like everybody else, we could use, a lot more.
Well, what are your tribal citizens saying about the process? Are they pretty confident?
I don't know about the confident level. They're glad that it's here. As I think I mentioned the last time, we have lost a few citizens to the virus, not as many as others. We've had a few that have chosen not to accept the vaccine just because it's a little bit early. And then we've had others who have contracted the virus who are not eligible yet for the vaccine. But so far, from everything I'm hearing, we feel pretty good about the number of people that are accepting the vaccine.
Very interesting. And I know, like a lot of tribes, you're challenged with so many issues from the health to the economics. You operate 4 casinos in both Indiana and Michigan. How have they fared through the pandemic?
They have fared far better than what we initially expected. We are operating at about 70%. We have turned to a non-smoking facility right now temporarily. And I say temporarily, the final decision has not been made yet, but we are getting a lot of very positive feedback with respect to not being a smoking facility. But the other probably more important thing is we're getting a lot of positive feedback on the level of caution that we've taken to hopefully prevent the spread of the virus. We require masks, we have the dividers, we do the temperature checks. And for the most part, all of our guests have been very responsible in keeping their masks on inside the facility. So the properties are doing very well, all things considered.
We've learned so much about this virus in the past few months, and being able to operate a business like that, I think is really extraordinary. And to have people be confident about it as they go to facilities like that.
Yeah, I think the confidence level is probably the number one thing that continues to bring the folks back. We're very proud of the operation that we have, even pre-pandemic, but adding the safeguards that we have implemented since then, and the fact that they're not very intrusive to our guests as they come in, I think has continued to help us a lot.
I've been reading all I can on what happened in 1919 and 1920. And it's really interesting how after that pandemic, tribes came out of it with really a renewed sense of an economy. And I'm curious, you think you're prepared for that next wave?
Well, I think we're prepared as we can be, given that there was no preparation when it first sprang upon us. We have learned a lot, yet, it's still a moving target, an ever-changing story. It has changed a lot on how we do business. We just upgraded our technology to 5G, so we're doing a lot of things now virtual. We use some of our CARES money to put computers in all the homes that didn't have them so that we can keep the level of communication as updated as we can. We're not running at the same level of employees that we have. We have basically been forced to become more efficient, but we've also learned a lot about the efficiencies. Now that's a double edge. There's a positive side to that, and there's a negative side to that. The negative side is we've got a lot of very good people who probably will not be coming back to work because of just the nature of the beast. but it's forced us to examine a lot of different things, a lot of different areas. But I think it will make us a better government, a better community at the end of the day.
Well, what are some of the type of ways that it's going to be different for individuals as we go forward?
Well, I think it has caused us to be more focused because we know everybody, and I really believe everybody has been impacted in some way by the virus, and most of that has been negative. So I think our empathy and our focus on doing what we can to help as much as we can and continue to improve that quality of life has made us better leaders, a better government. We've pretty much re-examined everything, all of our programs and our benefits. We've looked at them and consider, okay, are there ways that we can improve? And much to my surprise, because I thought we had a pretty good operation in the beginning anyway, we have made some significant improvements in our delivery of service. Now, some of it's not been the most convenient for some of our people because we do a lot of stuff by appointment only. But the change there is you don't have people coming in and then waiting long periods of time. You got people coming in, they get seen, and they get out. So we don't have a lot of congregating, which again, like I said before, is another double-edged sword because we've got people now that are missing the opportunity to interact with family, friends, and that kind of stuff. And we need to move past that point so people can get back together. Computers are nice, but it's not the same as face-to-face.
Indeed. You know, one of the things that strikes me is when people look at this big story and think about how governments operate, they're going to look to tribal governments as some of the most innovative during this whole crisis, whether it be some of the really early shutdowns to just how you do business differently.
You know, there is a difference. I want to be careful how I say it because I don't want to sound disrespectful to any government. But on the way into the office this morning, I was listening to the news, and I live in Michigan, although we operate in 2 states. Michigan has received over 500,000 vials of the virus, but yet they've only given out 120. You know, there's over 400 vials of virus that they could be, helping people with that for reasons I don't know have not been given. You know, we are at the point where every vial that we get in, we're using. So I don't, it could be because we're a smaller community, but we have, initially when we interviewed the first time, we set up a task force right out of the gate. That task force has done an excellent job. We are very fortunate that we have our own citizen doctor who I don't know when the man sleeps because he is so entrenched in this and looking at all the updates and all the best ways to deliver services. And even in the task force call this morning, I learned something that I wasn't aware of. And I don't know if you're aware of it, Mark, or your listeners will be aware of it. But, the vaccines so far, the ones that have been approved are 2-part vaccines. So you get the first vaccine and then you got to wait 2-3 weeks, get the second vaccine, and then still a couple of weeks before you're fully immune. So it's 6 weeks from the time you get it until you're somewhat comfortable. And I say somewhat because they're not 100% effective. I had not picked up on that information yet. So even though we get it, we're still 6 weeks in that period where we're still vulnerable. So I thought that was very interesting information and communication that we have to get out to our people.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, that second dose is almost going to be more important than the first because you lose so much of the efficiency if you can't get that.
But I'm sure like myself, a lot of our people don't read all these medical journals and stuff on how that stuff works. And that was brand new information to me that I had not considered.
Let me ask you about your relations with the United States and particularly a new administration and a new Congress. What do you think should be the message from tribal governments to the new government?
I think the message needs to be the continued argument that all of the tribes have, I believe, the fulfillment of the treaty obligations, of the United States to the tribes. And if we can get the United States government to fulfill those obligations to the level that we need them, I think that will be great. If we can reduce some of the paperwork that we have to go through for land and trust applications, as an example. and not just gaming applications, non-gaming applications. You know, let us get land in the trust that will allow us to do some other things outside of gaming, expand our economic base. I think will be very helpful. And I do believe, I have a lot of hope under this administration, much like the Obama administration, a lot of that will go much easier. You know, we were able to progress quite a bit under President Obama's administration.
Well, and with a new Senate, I mean, certainly you're going to have more cooperation likely, because in the past, last time there was a 50-50 Senate, you basically had a chairman and vice chairman who worked together. And so it's going to just open up all kinds of opportunities.
I've not seen if they've made the second call yet. I heard early this morning they made one call, so I don't know if they've called a second race or not. But you know, I will admit up front, I do not support one party control, irregardless of the party. But it should make life a little bit easier for the tribes, I believe.
Let me ask one thing. I just read a study that if you take all the Indian gaming operations combined, it's the 14th largest employer in the United States. Do you feel like the government treats the industry that way?
I think a lot of that depends, Mark, on where you're at. In Michigan, of course, we're well established, 12 federally recognized tribes here. I think we've got 25 Native American casinos. You know, I don't know what the last count of employees are. We have a great relationship in Michigan, and they do recognize the economic value of what the tribes do. However, in Indiana, it's brand new to the folks. You know, we are the only federally recognized tribe. They only have one Native American casino. But I will share with you a personal feeling that under the current administration of Governor Holcomb, there have been great strides made in how that relationship is developed. And I think over time, we can get to the same point in Indiana as we did in Michigan.
Thank you, Chairman Matthew Wesaw from the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
We'll be right back. Portland, Oregon is a city with a vibrant American Indian population, and a lot of news has happened there in the past few months. Richard Walker is a correspondent and covering that news, mostly for Indian Country Today. His story, Portland Paves a New Path Toward Inclusion, was published this week. Welcome, Richard.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mark.
Tell us, what's the big story going on in Portland?
Well, as you know, there are quite a few protests going on in Portland. Portland's been the center of a lot of protest activity, dating back to the deaths last year of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Protests going on there, as have protests been going on throughout the United States. But amidst all of this, there has been a history of disenfranchisement and prejudice against and lack of opportunity for people of color, Native Americans, African Americans, and this kind of came to a head last year and continuing on now with the efforts to save the Red House on Mississippi, a home owned by an African American and Native American family in a historically African American neighborhood, which ironically, that neighborhood, the Albina neighborhood Albina neighborhood of Portland, was an area where real estate policies established a century ago really forced or kept African Americans in that neighborhood and restricted African American home ownership outside that area. And so, ironically, now African American families in that area are now being dislocated, forced to move because of efforts to redevelop that neighborhood. So I think that what Portland has done is they've tried amidst all of this. They've recognized starting about 10 years ago that Native Americans, at least, had been treated unjustly. Native American history and the Native American presence in Portland was largely being ignored. And what that's accomplished or what that's resulted in, as in many communities throughout the United States, is an achievement gap in our schools, in local schools, lack of representation in local government, and other things. And so, a lack of a voice for Native Americans. And so what the city of Portland did, led by Amanda Fritz, a Portland City Council member or commissioner who just retired from the city council at the end of 2020, 10 years ago began this long process of trying to correct all of that and ensure there's Native American representation, that people feel that they have a voice in the community, to ensure that people are treated more justly. And so they've adopted a series of directives this year on December 17th. That was a culmination of nearly a decade of work that has resulted in government-to-government consultation agreements between the city and tribes. The declaration, the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day in Portland, the creation of the Tribal Relations Office in City Hall, the convening of an annual summit of tribal and city leaders, and day-long cultural trainings for city employees. And the latest directives that were adopted just continue to build on that and will ultimately lead to a formal statement of land acknowledgement. And so those are some significant steps, but obviously, and what I was trying to lead into with the history is it's one step, but it appears to be one of many that the city is going to have to do to make sure that all people, not just Native Americans, but African Americans and others, feel included and represented and treated fairly and justly in the city. And so it's interesting to see if these directives, these measures that the city of Portland has taken, will be kind of a framework for addressing some of these, addressing inequities in other parts of the community.
It's fascinating. And what I'm really intrigued by is it's almost like a community treaty negotiation where different parts of the community are saying, we have an ongoing stake in this, and the city is saying the same thing. That's really remarkable when you think about it.
Yeah, and there are other community organizations that have reached out and worked with tribal governments and tribal peoples in Portland and have established their own land acknowledgement statements. What Commissioner Fritz said she wanted to make sure was done was that that any statement that the city of Portland makes is correct, and is, as she said, that the tribes are spoken of in a way that they want to be that they want their history and their connection to Portland portrayed or stated. And so she's making sure. Unfortunately, I don't know what the other organizations did as in terms of outreach, but the city of Portland, and I'm sure there was outreach and collaboration, but the city of Portland, because this will be an official statement of land acknowledgement, they really want to make sure that they collaborate and that they have it right.
Richard Walker, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark.
And that is our slice of the Indigenous world today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back for another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahant.
You got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing Rock.
Indian Country Today is recorded at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Indian Country Today.